2. Next, events in the Middle East. A discussion titled Israel and Its Neighbors in an Era of Peace. Among those we'll hear from former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger and Israeli Foreign Minister Shimon Peres. This event runs a little more than an hour.
Good morning. I'm Judith Kipper, and along with Tony Kortesman, Director of the Middle East Studies Program, it is a tremendous privilege today to start out. This is the first time I'm at this podium at CSIS, my new home for exactly a month. And it's a tremendous privilege to have the Foreign Minister of Israel, Shimon Peres, with us. And of course, we are especially honored to have Dr. Kissinger agree to travel late in the night, come to Washington to preside and to introduce and to comment. It's a real double header. We've got 2 Nobel Prize winners here, 2 of the world's great statesmen. The way it will work is I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Kissinger, who will introduce the foreign minister, who will speak for 20 or 25 minutes, and then they will, I think, both probably engage in responding to your questions and comments. We are very crowded today. We can't see your faces from up here because of the lights. So please, when you ask questions, wait for the mic and identify yourself, and please stand. Dr. Kissinger, it's a great pleasure to have you with us today.
Shimon and ladies and gentlemen, before anybody panics, let me make clear I am not going to answer questions addressed to Shimon. It's a great privilege for me to introduce my longtime friend, Shimon Peres. I met him when he was Director General of the Defense Ministry longer ago than I care to admit, when he was engaged in procuring airplanes from France. I only now found out that he didn't know French when he started on this process. I shudder to think what would have happened if he had known French with the military balance in the Middle East. But during the time that I've known him, his evolution traces the evolution of Israeli thinking from having to be concerned almost exclusively with the question of survival and of security, to the question of coexistence, and then to the question of reconciliation, an extraordinarily complicated process. When people who both have deep commitment to a territory and live side by side in that territory have to find out a mode, first of living together, and then of cooperation. There is now a peace agreement with Egypt. There's progress being made on the peace agreement with Syria. And there's the extraordinarily complicated issue of the West Bank. How to reconcile Arab dignity with Israeli security, which is really the key issue that has to be settled there. And how to express this in instruments that have a permanent validity is a huge and complex task. To be quite frank, when I first saw the agreement, I had my reservations about this or that provision. But it's also true that if it hadn't been done quickly, it might not have been done at all. Not only might not, it would not have been done at all. And in fact, the loose ends of the agreement will probably turn out to be its strength, because they require a process extending over a period of time in which the two sides must face the problem of coexistence, which is perhaps as fundamental as the problem of peace and which is absolutely underlying it. There are always debates on the merits of this or that aspect. But there's no debate about the fact that without Shimon's inspiration, matters would not have reached the point they did on the lawn of the White House. I've read in some book reviews that Shimon is an idealistic dreamer. And that's probably true. But it's the dreamers who change the world. The cynics know too much of the cost. And almost every great thing that's been done was somebody's dream before it became a reality. Now, while the Israeli team has not always agreed with each other in their past career, it's an extraordinary combination of dreamer and strategist that is moving the peace process forward. And I want you to know, Shimon, we all wish you the success that your inspiration deserves. And having observed you now for 30 years, it is extraordinary to see how many of the ideas you used to mention only in private conversation have now become the common currency of the day. And there are not many statesmen about whom this can be said. So it is a great privilege for me to introduce you and to express my confidence that the process that is going on all fronts is the only way to peace and stability, and my confidence that I think in the end it will succeed. Shimon.
Thank you, Henry. Ladies and gentlemen, may I say about Henry one word. In spite of the fact that he made peace between us and the Egyptians, he is admired by both of us. It's a very rare phenomenon in history. Not only did Henry organize the first peace arrangement, actually the first two peace arrangement between us and Egypt, which looked at the time as an impossible proposition, but to his credit, if there is already a precedent of an agreement with Syria, again, Henry did it. And knowing Assad, one cannot exaggerate the importance of the achievement. And we intend to continue to do so. And as a personal note, I'm not really a graduate of any university, but I've learned to appreciate teachers more than universities. And I consider Henry Kissinger as one of the teachers in my life, from whom I learned and I continue to learn to this very day. And this for me an occasion to say to Henry, thank you very much for that. I think the peace process is suffering from some weak points. First of all, part of the negotiations between us and the Palestinians and between us and the Syrians is being done publicly. So we keep accusing each other. Since each of us has an opposition, they accuse us as well. So we have four parties, all of them complaining. No party defending peace. The Palestinians say we don't do enough. We say that they don't do enough. Their opposition is saying they're irresponsible. And our opposition is even saying more than that. But the fact is that in spite of all the skepticism, new realities were born and are beginning to have a life of their own. Then again, we suffered from other two weaknesses. All parties, or each party, was until now negotiating with its own self. Then each of us was completely brilliant. I mean, when we were negotiating in our own party, what should be the solution? My God, we got such a brilliant solution. So did the Palestinians. When we met, we lost our brilliancy because we discovered there was another party with other expectations and demands and desires. And all of a sudden, instead of maintaining the brilliance, we have to discover common grounds which don't look as shiny and promising, but which is the only opportunity to reach an agreement. And the third weakness in the negotiation, as I see it, we were trained to negotiate the past. None of us is really trained to negotiate the future. We negotiate our memories, our suspicions, our hatreds, our prejudices, the dangers. And I think many of them are invalid or irrelevant. Actually, we are going over all of us. You, but not only you, even small countries like us, from an age of enemies to an age of problems. We were again used to fight enemies. We knew their address, we knew their strengths, we knew their danger. We could have tell our people, here they are, look at them, give us the necessary means, soldiers, monies to fight them. But I wonder if our problems today are the dangers. As an Israeli, I'm asking myself, what is the real danger to Israel? The tanks of Syria or the attempt of Iran to get a nuclear bomb. What is the danger? Our conflict with our neighbors, or the clouds hanging in the air by an extremely fanatic movement that hangs on religious pretext and is trying to get hold of nuclear bombs and using in the meantime terror. Actually, all potentials, as all dangers, lost their borders, lost their land, lost their material measurements. What makes today a country strong or weak is not the size of the land or the wealth of the natural resources or the number of the people or the might of the army, but really the height of science, the employment of modern technology, the capacity to introduce the latest developments and handle information. Then science doesn't have sovereignty, and information doesn't need visas, and technology doesn't have frontiers. It's available to all of us. Japan doesn't have land or oil, and it is wealthy. Russia has everything, and it is poor. The story I like to tell is when the Russians have renewed the relations with Israel, the first thing they bought from us were cows. Why cows? It came out that the Israeli cow produces 3 times as much milk as a Russian cow. Now it's the same cow with the same horns. The real difference is in the system. And we were quick to learn that you can have more milk from the system than from the cow. You can really have more from technology than from the material or physical assets. The same goes for dangers. I mean, what is the real sense today of national defense when missiles are not impressed by fronts or frontiers or fortification. How can you have a real national defense? How can you defend your life when you don't have an arm against nuclear weapons? So again, you have to turn from technology, from borders, from nationalities, to regions, to global arrangements, to political understanding. And the army isn't a problem, because an army cannot conquer science and cannot stop a nuclear weapon. So it must have a different meaning. If communism collapsed, it wasn't because of a military intervention or political pressure. It was simply because a new age overcame the old Iron Curtain and emerged on the silver curtain of the Russian television. And it's still going on. And I know that the United States has lost its enemy with the collapse of the Soviet Union. And you know, when you lose your enemy, you lose your foreign policy. How can you have a foreign policy if you don't have an enemy? How can a president convince the Congress and the people to mobilize armies or to provide money if you don't see the enemy? But instead of enemies, we have dangers, like the spread of nuclear weapons in the hands of irresponsible countries, like pollution, like drugs, like poverty, like fundamentalism, like crazy people getting, if you know, chemical weapons in Japan, or car bombs like in Oklahoma, or like bombs in Iran. And those are, again, dangers not confined at any borders. The same goes in the Middle East. If I shall be maybe a little bit one-sided, but still truthful, what happened between us and the Palestinians is not only that we are going to solve one of the most complicated problems in our time, but the fact is that we are having peace not only with the Palestinians, but that the Palestinians are experiencing for the first time in their life to be Palestinian people. They've never been before. Gaza is 7,000 years old. There was never a Palestinian authority in Gaza. Never. The Palestinians are now in charge of the education of their children in Gaza and the West Bank. They never had it, neither under the Ottoman Empire, nor under the British Empire, nor under the Jordanians or the Egyptians or the Israelis. Today, for the first time, they can educate their own children. We did it not because we are so generous, but because in order for us to exist, it is not enough to have a geographic address, to have our historic land, but to return to our historic values. Whoever learns history with a Jewish eye knows that the greatest mistake is to try to dominate another people against their wish. We never dominated anybody, and whoever dominated us disappeared from history. Why should we follow them? If we exist for 4,000 years, it's because we were careful morally, not only politically. And we have to keep it on. Now, analyzing that in the Middle East, it is exactly the same problem. We don't consider, I don't consider at least, that our greatest danger are the armies of our neighbors. But the greatest danger is the fundamentalistic movement, which has a large audience, which has a great attraction, which is supplied with the food of poverty and ignorance, which is feeling alone and discriminated, which can use terror, and which hopes to get nuclear weapons. This is a danger not only to the Jewish state, it is a danger to every progressive state in the Middle East. And all division between Arabs and Jews should be replaced by the necessary confrontation between an old, fanatic, blind force and an obligation of our generation to enable the youngsters of all of our countries to enter the 21st century, which is not an extension of the 20th century. I think in the 21st century, all of us will see a new history, namely, the end of the hunting season in history, the beginning of a competitive, creative season in human experience. And that's what we have to do. What we have achieved until now is Gaza is becoming a reality. Still full of problems, still in need of more solutions. Because what we call security means for them economy. When we put a closure on Gaza in order to enhance our security, it means we are affecting badly their economic need. And we cannot go on like it. We have to find a solution to it, and a major solution, and we shall find one. But on the other hand, I do believe that Gaza is a reality. It's becoming a reality more and more every day. While the opposition in Israel accused us of giving away land for no good reason, I must say, to the credit of our opposition, we have an excellent opposition in the country, that none of them wants to return to Gaza. So at least something we did achieve. For them, opposition today is a memory, not a program. And that's not bad if we can continue to do so in the future. The Palestinians were suspicious that we want to have Gaza first and stop, and not to go further. They are wrong. We had Gaza first. We are now trying to have the West Bank following up. Because the West Bank, like Gaza in many parts, is not a piece of land, but a group of people. And Gaza, all told, is 220 square miles with 1 million people residing there under the most densely populated, demanding conditions. And we don't have a solution for it. They can solve their problems. In the West Bank, which is something like, again, 2,500 square miles, we have 1,200,000 Palestinians, 120,000 Jewish settlers. It is clear who is the majority and who is the minority. And I don't think the problems are the settlements or the settlers. The problem is the relations between the settlers and the Palestinians. If we can change the relations, we shall not have a problem. If we shall not change it, we shall not have a solution. In Israel, we have 5.5 million people, 4.5 million Jewish, 1 million non-Jewish Arabs. No problems. They are a minority of 17%, and they are citizens, and they are behaving with great dignity and respect. And it can happen elsewhere. So what we have is to change the relations. We are now negotiating the second stage on 3 major issues. One is the nature of elections. We made most of the road. I think we solved 90% of the problem. The last 10%, which are quite thorny issues, will be solved in the last moment. I mean, when you negotiate, you have a crisis, and then a negotiation, and then another crisis, and then another negotiation. But finally, you have the last crisis and the final agreement. And the last 10% will be done there. We are also negotiating on handing over the powers from our hands to the hands of the Palestinians. There are 38 ministries. 5 were already handed over even before the agreement. Now we have promised Arafat to hand over another 8, so it's already 13. About the remaining ministries, we are in the midst of negotiations, and I don't know if we shall agree on everything, but on most of the things we shall agree. So we may agree on having democracy, on them having power. So Arafat once complained in the long nights we had, he says, democracy, my God, who has invented it? It is so tiring. And I must say I had sympathy to his remark, sitting all the time and negotiating and negotiating. And the third issue is the most complicated one, and that is what Sandra has mentioned, how to hand over to the Palestinians their dignity and how to keep the security of Israel. The basic problem, in short, is the Palestinians say, we cannot go to elections if your army will remain in the heart of the cities. You have to redeploy the army from the populated areas. We say yes, but it so happened that the main roads which are connecting Jewish settlements are crossing the towns and the cities. And we wouldn't like to make them targets for killing and shooting. So we have to find a solution how to do it. This is the main issue. And that's what we are now negotiating. If the first two issues are being negotiated openly, this issue is being negotiated privately or secretly, wherever you want, and we are making a major effort to meet the date, the target date, to complete the negotiations, which is set for July the 1st. We are trying to do so. By the way, in all those negotiations and exchanges, we are being helped very much and very positively by the United States, its administration, its institutions, its press, its people. It's very important because at the time the Middle East looked like a lost case. If we should really be able to bring peace, it may serve as a model to other places too. The second point is with the Jordanian. You know, it was like a couple that was in a secret love for a long time and finally married openly. And none of us is disappointed. We have much respect for the Jordanian administration. We think the King of Jordan has introduced a highly civilized administration in Jordan. Jordan, like ourselves, doesn't have oil, is short of water, has hardly any natural resources. You know that some of the American people are laughing at us. They say the Middle East is divided between oily countries and holy countries. So since Jordan don't have oil, we must be holy countries. And the meaning of it is to invest basically in the human factor, in education, in relations, and I think Jordan did an important job. But with the Jordanians, we are trying to do something else, which is refreshing and interesting. Most of the border between us and Jordan is called the Arabah, which is a piece of desert, beginning at the Red Sea and winding up at the Dead Sea. It was never touched by a human hand. It was never cultivated. It doesn't have water. It is sand and desert and a broken land. I mean, whoever created this piece of land was absent-minded completely when you look at it. And instead of making it as a fortified border, having a fence, putting mines, dividing the line, we agreed to take the whole piece of land and make it into an industrial, agricultural, and touristic zone as a joint venture for the two of us. Just to give one example to explain what I mean, north of Aqaba, there is a Jordanian airport. North of Eilat, there is an Israeli airport. The city of Eilat grew and the airport became part of the city, so we have to build a new airport north of Eilat. And the Jordanians and us agreed that instead that we shall build a new airport, we shall take the Jordanian airport and make it available to the two countries. One airport for the two countries. And what we did with the airport, we intend to do with the railroad, with the road, with the ports, with the desalinization. And this may become the first frontier in the world that instead of being a dividing line, will be an occasion for cooperation. Personally, I got this idea and I employed it somewhere else when I visited Venice, maybe 30 years ago, I don't remember. And I saw the bridges over the canal. And I saw on every bridge shops, repair shops. And asked myself, maybe what the Venetians were doing on the bridges, we should do on our frontiers. And that the first experience was with the good fence in Lebanon. Then we used it for the first time. It was very successful. By the way, we are trying to do it with the Palestinians as well. The basic thing concerning Jordan is that both the Jordanian kingdom and us are interested to show to the people concerned that peace is not a political ceremony alone. It is not a photo opportunity. It is not a handshaking arrangement, but it will bear fruits. And may I say that while leaders can understand that it takes time before we shall see the fruits, people are impatient. May I say, as a remark concerning our own party, we are losing politically and gaining historically. What we are doing may be understood in 10 or 15 years, but in the meantime, we have to pay the price. And the discrepancy between the cost and the results is our greatest political problem in democratic terms. But again, we have decided to try and win peace, thinking that this may be more important even than to win elections. So I hope we shall win the elections. I think about political leaders that they should behave like bus drivers. Namely, they should never turn their heads back to see how the passengers feel, because they will make all the passengers nervous. It is better that the driver will hold the wheel and look ahead, and that's it. I told yesterday a story. A good friend of mine was General Dayan, and once he took me for a drive in his car, and he was driving in a mad way. So a policeman stopped him, and he says, General, if you will continue to drive like it, you will kill yourself, and you will kill even Mr. Peres. So Dayan told him, you know, I have just one eye. What do you want me to watch? The speedometer or the road? And I believe drivers, leaders should watch the road. And I hope others will do likewise. Anyway, we feel an upbeat in our agreement with the Jordanians. We gave back to Jordan every drop of land. We returned to Jordan 370 square kilometers. All the stories that the Jordanians made any compromise on the land is unfounded. We gave back 50 million cubic meters, and now we are working in a very promising way. The third issue is Syria. I never in my life so many never in my life so many guesses about a single leader as I heard about Assad. If you want, I can repeat all the guesses. It may take an hour. If you want to have my opinion, I don't have one. I know just one thing, that would President Assad say no to the American proposal, it would be the end of the negotiation. Once he said yes, it's the beginning of it. Then, my final remark, we have to extinguish all the flames around us, so to meet the greatest or the largest fire endangering all of us. And we cannot bring an end to fundamentalism by rifles or tanks. We must be more sophisticated. And more sophisticated means to bring an end to the wars, to improve the economic standards of life, to change the relations among the three religions, to have religions without knives and believers without hatred, and to address ourselves to the young generation and provide them with a better education for the future. We're at the beginning of a road. But once we began, we have not only a road, we have people moving on it. And that is our greatest hope. Thank you.
Shimon, thank you very much for this humane and thoughtful and far-sighted presentation. When I introduced you, I should have mentioned that one of the achievements of the peace policy of both sides is the fact that so many representatives of embassies of Arab nations in Washington are represented here, and I would especially like to thank them and single them out for coming here. And in fact, of course, this audience is a tribute to the respect in which you held and the commitment America has to help this peace process to a conclusion that is decent and fair to all sides, which is the only settlement that can possibly last. And now we'll be glad to take questions. One of my problems is there's so many lights that I can't separate the troublemakers from the others. So if you'll put up your hand and we'll try to recognize you, and wait for a roving microphone. Chuck Percy.
Wait for the mic, Senator.
Minister, I know I speak on behalf of everyone in this room for our appreciation for your being here with Henry Kissinger and for CIS for sponsoring this wonderful meeting at this particular time in the peace process. My question pertains to another neighbor of yours, Lebanon. We have talked about Lebanon in your home years ago, and peace process should involve Lebanon, of course. There will never be peace until Lebanon is Lebanon again, and it can rule itself. And what process has to be taken, what steps have to be taken now to bring about the withdrawal of exterior forces from Lebanon so that Lebanon can be Lebanon again?
About Lebanon, let me clarify the Israeli position. We don't have any territorial claim on Lebanese land. There is an international border that we respect and they respect, and eventually we shall go back there. Secondly, we don't have any ambition to the Lebanese water, so we are the right country. Then again, we do not have any inclination to play a role in the Lebanese politics. We tried and we failed, and we don't want to repeat it. The only thing what we want is to introduce a security arrangement that will enable us to leave the Lebanese land. On the other hand, we cannot replace Lebanon so she will be able to regain her independence. We don't feel that she enjoys today a full independence. And that is for them to decide. But we are ready to negotiate separately with the Lebanese and separately with the Syrians, and if this is impossible, to negotiate jointly with the two of them. But we feel that it is almost self-understood that if we shall reach an agreement with the Syrians, we shall reach an agreement with the Lebanese as well.
Wait for the mic, please.
Wait for the mic. Can you wait for the mic? Wait a minute. It's going to come. Where is it?
Yes, Mr. Peres, there's been nobody that's been more associated with the concept of a Marshall Plan for the Middle East than yourself. You probably coined the term and have written extensively about it. One of the preconditions for the peace negotiations was to create an economic development in the area as the basis for collaboration between the peoples. From the outside, it seems as if this has not occurred as rapidly as was initially envisioned, at least in Gaza and the West Bank. To what do you attribute the slowness of the process, and do you have any proposals for how to speed this thing up? It seems to me that you mentioned the growth of fundamentalism, poverty feeding that. How do we deal with this in order to eliminate the basis for that?
One of the reasons to it, I believe, that most of the leaders are more concerned about politics than about economics. What we really have to do is to economize our policies instead of politicizing our economies. And unless the people in the Middle East will understand that the Marshall Plan is no longer an option, I do not see any government going to pay for the follies of the Middle East, particularly today. What Marshall Plan in modern terms means is to restructure economy in a modern structure in market economy. What we have to do is to stop wasting so much money on arms, $70 billion a year. No Marshall Plan can give us even half of it. But we ourselves can save $35 or $40 billion a year easily. The second is we have to handle what nature has provided us and what rapid growth is endangering us in a regional way. What I'm meaning is the higher the rate of birth is, the faster the Middle East is becoming a desert. 89% of the land is already deserted land. Now, water is apolitical. You don't have right-wing water and left-wing water. And rains don't go through the customs. And rivers don't follow frontiers. So if we are serious and we want to provide food to our children, we have to handle the available water in a responsible way, not in accordance with the political divisions. Again, nobody will pay for it unless we shall do it ourselves. Then we have to introduce new industries, like, for example, tourism. The attractions are there, both by history and by landscape. And tourism today is a fast-growing industry. There is no reason why an American or a Japanese or European tourist will not be able to visit on the same trip Sharm el-Sheikh or Taba or Petra or Eilat or Marrakesh or Baalbek if we want to provide food to our children. It goes slow because still many people in the Middle East think there is national economies, Jewish economy, Arab economy. It's total nonsense. There is no longer a Middle Eastern economy or an Arab economy or a Jewish economy. There is a Middle Eastern poverty, but not economy. And if we want to improve it, we have to improve the situation in the Middle East and adopt the rules and regulations of modern economy. Now, the last remark I would say about it, with the privatization, a lot of money went over from the hands of the governments to the hands of private companies. Governments have budgets, they don't have money. Companies have money, they don't have policies. And unless there will be a new combination between the two of them, there won't be investment. And what I suggest briefly is to privatize the peace. We have privatized everything. Why don't you privatize the peace? And if the companies will not do it, for example, and they will not invest in the Middle East, and God forbid, if only, for example, the oil wells will fall in the hands of the fundamentalists, all the companies and all the governments will pay through the nose at that time. And what I have learned from Henry Kissinger was one unforgettable rule. Try to be ahead of the storm, because if you will be at the end of the storm, you will find it is a catastrophe.
I'm Abdul Salam Masarwi. I'm representing the Voice of Palestine in Jericho, Mr. Foreign Minister. I have a couple of questions. How do you respond to the latest poll in Israel where a good percentage of Israelis, I think about 23-25%, prefer to share Jerusalem with the Palestinians and give them control of East Jerusalem? And while we are in Jerusalem, I'll ask the second question. And why did you raise, or your government raise, the issue of confiscating, expropriating Palestinian land at this juncture in the negotiations with the Palestinians? Are you still planning to expropriate more Palestinian land in East Jerusalem in the near future? Thank you.
On the first, sir, polls are changeable. We have to decide on the policies, not on the polls. And that's what we are going to do. On the second question, I'm not so sure that you are aware about the facts. We are talking about a expropriation, not a confiscation, of 53 acres of land. Only 24 acres of them belong to Arabs. The rest belong to Jewish people. They were expropriated not to change the political setup, but to enable to build buildings. And when President Mubarak asked me and Chairman Arafat asked me, why did we expropriate the land? I asked them if they're against expropriation from Jewish people, only from Arab people. Because most of the expropriation was from Jewish people. And the reason is that Jerusalem is a living city. Children are being born, youngsters are falling in love and getting married. You need houses, you need kindergartens, and you cannot keep land empty and idle. We admit that we have to build not only for the Jewish residents, but also for the Arab residents. The government of Israel is responsible for the needs of the Arabs as well as for the Jews. So is the municipality. And my last remark on it, which I say with an air of bitterness, we don't understand. Why didn't the Palestinians, if they felt that we are doing something wrong, approach us? We have informal, direct channels. They could have called us up and say, look, what are you doing? You're insulting us. You're hurting us. And I say that even the feelings are important. I don't ignore it. Instead, you went directly to the Arab League. And from the Arab League to the United Nations, to the Security Council. You made a scandal. And the minute it became a public scandal, what do you expect us to do? But to defend ourselves. And thanks heaven that the United States has employed its veto. Otherwise, this would become the new channel of a double attempt to take from Israel whatever you can and attack Israel whenever you may. What is the Arab League, after all? What did the Arab League contribute to peace? What did the Arab League assist the Palestinian Authority? Where? How? Just to protest? Just to attack? Just to criticize? And we don't accept it. We are ready to sit and, believe me, to take in account the feelings of the Palestinians. Not only the rights, but it must be mutually done.
Ibrahim Owais from Georgetown University. If you look into the crystal ball of Shimon Peres himself into the future, in the long list of and complicated list of the peace agenda, what do you think could be realized within 1 year from now?
To complete the first stage of agreement with the Palestinians, that will clearly be done. To start a very special relationship with the Jordanians in the economic domain. To have the businessmen of the Middle East together with the businessmen of America, Europe, and Japan, building, in fact, a new economy in the Middle East. It's beginning, it will be continued. We have much respect for Morocco that is shown in the camp. It is courageous on her side. I hope that other Arab countries will follow suit, though we are disappointed until now, because the Arab boycott is still on, terror is still on. No new relations were established but by Morocco. New promises were given and not kept. And if we shall do that, I think we shall begin to have a majority for peace. We don't have yet a majority for peace in the Middle East. We may have a majority in Israel, we may have a majority in Jordan, a majority in Morocco, a majority among the Palestinians. But there are other majorities who are very hostile. And if we shall achieve it in 1 year, and in 1 year things will look much better. You know, when you have war, war is always accompanied by fear. When you have peace, peace is always accompanied by skepticism. And we shall overcome it.
Mr. Peres, it was a very painful chapter in our democracy. Do you accept that the passengers back in the bus are ready now for another chapter? Can it be done without public diplomacy of Assad and his meeting with Rabin for a referendum in Israel? Thank you.
I think for peace there is a need that Assad and other members of the political level will meet in full daylight and air out their differences. If you want to be peace, stop being shy. Let's face it. And I think time has arrived. And this is not just a professional need, this is a psychological requirement. Because we have to convince the Syrians that we are serious about peace. The Syrians have to convince the Israelis that they are serious of peace. And the range of public reassurances. And I hope it will happen in the future. About settlements, I think that it should be an Israeli decision and not a matter of a negotiation with the parties. And I think Israel has shown that she's capable to make decisions.
I may say one thing, if someone who once lost 35 days with Assad, I hope that when the Israeli leaders meet with him in open daylight, that they have a lot of time. Yes, sir.
Martin Walker from The Guardian. I think we all understand the reasons for your discretion in talking rather briefly about Syria in your presentation. But in the wake of Warren Christopher's announcement that there had been some kind of agreement upon a security framework talks reached last week, I wonder if you could give us your assessment of the current state of play and the expectations on the Syrian and the Golan Heights issue.
There are 4 issues between us and Syria: the nature of peace and normalization, the security arrangement, the final line of withdrawal, the interfacing of the implementation of the agreement. Those are the 4 issues. I, for one, would like to see all the 4 being negotiated simultaneously, but it doesn't work. The United States has suggested, and we have agreed, to take the most crucial issue, which is the security arrangement, and try and reach an agreement about it. I must say that if we shall be successful and reach an agreement, it will facilitate very much to negotiate the other 3 issues. The main problem we have had is the Syrians have asked for equality in security, to which we have agreed. But we said equality in security should be the result of the negotiation and not the system of negotiations. Namely, if the Syrians agree to demilitarize the Mile we have to agree to demilitarize the Mali. He says it doesn't make any sense, because in order to have an equality in geographic terms, you need 2 Golan Heights. Otherwise, how can you have equality? You have one mountain, so you cannot have equality. And you don't measure a mountain by the size, but also by its altitude. And I don't know any place which is as high as the Golan Heights. So how can we achieve geographic equality? And I'm glad that the Syrians and us decided to agree on whatever we may and to postpone the rest when the time will be fit to handle it. Something that enables us to start the negotiations.
Last question.
You have Sam Louis now. And you have Sam Louis there too.
Sam Lewis.
Shimon, you were a great statesman, and I know you
I shall not deny.
like the role,
That
and you deserve the title,
I'm sorry.
but you also have to be, at times, a politician and a political leader. So I want to ask you a political question, if I might. The prospect of obtaining peace depends obviously in part on the agreement and in part on the prospect of political leadership in Israel being able to support that agreement with the public when the time comes, those agreements. Your party seems to be undergoing a good deal of turmoil about the prospect of peace with Syria. You have a group called the Third Force, mostly from your party, that's threatening to form a new party. And of course, the Likud has its internal problems as well.
Doing much better now.
My question is, do you foresee any new alignments in the political party structure between now and the next election? And how do you think the possibility of new alignments affects the chances for Israel's public supporting peace with Syria and what it entails if you achieve that peace agreement?
I don't see new alignments, but I see new splits possible. And it's harmful. But let me, since this is the last question, wind up with a personal open remark. Many people are asking me what are the relations between Mr. Rabin and yourself. I say it's a matter of age. When we were young, we were quarreling. Now, when we are no longer babies, we understand that we have to work together in order to attain a goal which is larger than each of us and greater than both of us. And I think that if we shall continue to work together, no matter what the position of each of us will be, we have a fair chance to gain the trust of the people of Israel. And you know, at our age, when we tested already so many applauds and criticism and attack, what else can we have? Some more applauds, some more criticism. We have our files full and our quota accomplished. So we are free enough to think seriously, to tell the truth, to take upon us the difficult decisions, the tough one, and enable a younger generation enter a land and enter a period where they will be free from all the dilemmas and the mistakes that we have committed. We would like to see our children as well as the children of our neighbors coming in the 21st century, free, safe, secure, educated, so they will be able to compete with other children in the world. Because in the next century, what once used to be wars will be in the future competition of mind and of character. And that's what we are doing. whatever the Lord has provided us with time. We don't want to waste it on power. We want to invest it in correcting whatever we may and preparing the ground, whatever we have to, for an entirely new situation. And we should win.
Some decades ago, longer again than I want to admit, the Egyptian ambassador here, who happens to be in this room, Ashraf Gobal, at a time of constant confrontations, wars of attrition, and everything else, literally afterwards wrote a poem, very undiplomatic, and sent it to me about peace in the Middle East. It had quite an impact on me, actually, though it did not contain any practical suggestions. It showed that we are talking here about a spiritual problem, and in some ways a poetic problem. And I think the way Shimon has answered these questions should encompass the fact that obviously negotiations are going to be miserably tough, complicated, when Israel has no great margin of survival. And one has to recognize that the Arab peoples have suffered a great deal as well. And to reconcile these considerations is not going to be easy. But the spirit which has carried some of these discussions along, represented here by Shimon Peres and by some of the eloquent speeches of the Prime Minister Rabin, and also by Arab counterparts, is, I think, a hope for the future. And when Assad starts writing poetry, then we know we have reached the end of this process. So thank you all very much for coming. Would you all stay seated until the Foreign Minister has left the room? I'm going to say hello to a few friends here. Thank you very much.
The Israeli army has set November 1st as a target to withdraw troops from the West Bank. The army, however, plans to keep troops in Hebron, the second largest West Bank town, to protect some 450 Jewish settlers there.